must constantly look at things in a different way.
The Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast was created by two physical therapists out of the desire to learn more about the different educational roles in physical therapy and healthcare, and how healthcare education works by talking with educational leaders and people with different perspectives within physical therapy and across interdisciplinary lines on how education can be improved to disrupt the status quo of healthcare education. This is our journey, and thanks for listening. Are you a third-year physical therapy student that excels on tests when you have study guides, checklists, and deadlines? With all of the information available about how to prepare for the NPTE, it's easy to get disorganized and not feel prepared going into the big day. NPTE Prep Success is an online course that provides PT students easy-to-use study guides and step-by-step guidance through the NPTE preparation. To learn more, visit kylericeprep.com. Thank you again all for your continued support, and now for the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. My name is Brandon Pollen, and I am joined by my fellow co-host, Stephanie Wyruck. And unfortunately, F. Scott Field was unable to join us today as he had other commitments that he had to attend to. But today, I am super pumped to welcome a very, very special guest to the show today. Actually, I'll give a little disclaimer. This is the individual who actually pushed me to become a physical therapist. So without further ado, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Jojo Sayson, who is a fellowship-trained physical therapist from the Ola Grimsby Institute, who serves as a consultant and co-investigator, along with Dr. Alan Hargens, for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Human Research Program at the University of California, San Diego, with a NASA grant to examine the risks of spaceflight on spinal deconditioning in crew members of the International Space Station. He is also the president and CEO of Jojo Sayson's Physical Therapy and Rehabilitation in Bourbonnais, Illinois, which is actually my hometown. And I actually had the incredible honor to shadow Dr. Sayson in his clinic when I was a pre-PT student many years ago. He is also the president and founder of Project Michelangelo, which is an independent and private organization established in 2011, which serves as an educational endowment for needy but deserving children and young adults, along with providing assistance to children with cancer and life-threatening diseases, and by also helping to grant wishes for terminally ill children and their partners with rescue organizations in times of calamities and disasters and much more. Wow, I mean, Jojo, thank you for your tremendous service and dedication to others and to this profession, as I really look up to you as a role model. And like I said earlier, you're actually the person who inspired me to become a therapist. So I must say my deepest thanks for that. For our listeners, perhaps, who don't know a little bit about you or don't know your story, would you mind just giving our listeners some context of how you became a therapist?
Oh, very well. Thank you so much for that very kind and appreciative introduction, Brandon. Well, I'd like to, first of all, greet everybody out there in podcast land. I believe most of you are physical therapists, DPTs, maybe some physicians and educators, and those who may just want to learn what physical therapy is all about. Just call me Jojo. It's easier. All the kids know me as Jojo. I'll tell you more about what I do. I'm a physical therapist by trade. I graduated in 1984, so I've been a physical therapist for about 34 years now. Just a quick brief run through how I became a physical therapist. I came from the Philippines, and when I became accepted to college in the University of Santo Tomas, the Royal Pontifical University of Santo Tomas in the Philippines, I wanted to study a Bachelor of Science that will become a pre-med course for me because I wanted to be a surgeon. So that was my main goal. Everybody wanted Jojo to be a surgeon. Well, I took physical therapy because during that time I was kind of relatively unknown, and I have a passion for the mechanics of the human body, so I thought it would be a great start for a Bachelor of Science. Everything was set. I finished it in 4 years, 1984. I was accepted in medical school in the Philippines. It's one of the top universities in the Philippines. But I had an epiphany, Brandon. There was one time that I was working as an intern and watching this paraplegic trying to do some physiologic loading. And if people don't know what physiologic loading is even though the lower extremities are paralyzed, at least some kind of mechanical loading needed so the bones don't atrophy as much. So he was placed in these old planks, wooden planks behind his lower extremities. It was wrapped by dirty and bandages just to stiffen it up. And on the parallel bars, I saw him get up and just struggle. He struggled so much, and I just observed the man. And then I started thinking, would I like to be the physician writing the order for physical therapy and then sending the person away? Or would I want to be the person directly involved in helping that person and helping that man? Well, the answer was, well, I think I'd rather be the person working with that gentleman. So that was my epiphany. And I thought that, well, if I'm not going to be a surgeon, because I'm going to be a physical therapist, I'm going to go to the United States because there was an opening then. And I want to become the best or one of the best in the world at physical therapy. So now my paradigm shifted. So generally, it was more of an epiphany sometime that it's not about the prestige of being called a surgeon or how much money you're going to make, but suddenly it became a vocation. And that started it all, Brandon.
Wow. I mean, it's really inspiring to hear that. I mean, especially hearing that journey of how you saw that individual and how it totally changed your mind on what you wanted to do. And especially with really focusing on a career that really made an impact and really providing service to others. As I think there's many therapists that are listening that can definitely relate to maybe not that exact story, but a similar calling to serve other people. And again, to really find purpose and help others have purpose too. So I really find that really inspiring. Now, I know that the topic of discussion, of course, is focusing on space and, of course, a lot of avenues regarding aeronautics. But, for those healthcare providers who are listening, who are perhaps not aware, what do we know about the effects of spaceflight on the human body to kind of give some overall context before we dive into the research?
Before I got involved with the space program, you need some form of higher education of some sort so that you can be more qualified to talk to these people. That's part of what I wanted to kind of convey tonight. It's not just about the algorithms of how to become a physical therapist. It's about choosing a vocation, number one. Number two, how to grow in that vocation. And what I mean is that if you chose a vocation of service, it means that a patient will come to you in seeking help, looking at the physical therapist or a DPT. They're looking at that person as the institution of knowledge who will take care of them. So I would like to convey that there should be some form of accountability to that trust. Because in my observation throughout the decades, I've seen a lot of physical therapists who are physical therapists by trade, by licensure, but they fail miserably on the accountability. What I mean is that whether the patients get better or not, who cares? They're still going to get their paycheck. If the patient gets worse, who cares? There's not much of a self-introspection of what do I not know? And it begins with all the people listening out there, whether you're already an achieved professional, always think of the things that you may not know. Because when people are comfortable, then nothing grows. That's why the old saying, nothing grows in a comfort zone. So most of the time, people gets pushed by a tragedy of some sort to make a change in their life, like education. But you have to constantly think what is good for the patient and for youth, thinking about accountability. So that's what I did. I kept on stepping out of my comfort zone. I sought education in orthopedic manual therapy, and I sought for who I assessed to be the best that I can find out there. And his name is Ola Grimsby, and he's still teaching out there. He's Norwegian. He was one of the first, I think, the top 11 to 12 or 11 to 15th original manual therapists from Norway. So I sought some education. I got my master's of orthopedic manual therapy, and then later on a DMT, Doctor of Manual Therapy. And then I ended up teaching with them until I became a board of director. But most people would be comfortable getting their degree and practicing, and it should not be. There's a sea of knowledge out there that our limited minds can digest. But as much as possible, step out of it. So what I did was, this was more of a personal journey, that if I'm comfortable with my orthopedic manual therapy craft, what's next? So I thought maybe if I can find the smartest people on the planet, then that should be it. That would help mitigate some of my personal goals. Or personal goals means I want to convey that everybody has a personal goal, and it should be to better oneself, not for oneself's sake. And the purpose is to give up yourself for humanity, because that is called a vocation. So I got my education. I'm a doctor of manual therapy from the Old Space Institute. So now space. Okay. There is no direct connection or pathway from physical therapy to doing some work for NASA. There is none. Okay. So in any successful model of any high achiever, they did not walk the well-traveled road. You create your own pathway. So to going back to, I know it's a long answer, Brandon, when you ask what's in it in space. It all boils into a very simple word: mechanotransduction. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners have heard that mechanotransduction. So what does that mean? It means that this invisible force of energy, this force that the body experiences with gravity, with momentum, with inertia. The force is invisible, but that force is transmitted to the collagen, to the muscles, and all the soft tissues, to the bone. It stimulates the nucleus to create a messaging system, to create more proteins. That's why there's hypertrophy and there is atrophy, right? So if you just look at that one word, our human body was designed for a 1G environment, the Earth. That's considered 1G. If you remove that 1G, what will happen to the cells? Because the cells are always in flux. In flux means that why do we atrophy or hypertrophy? Because every second, 2 million of your viable cells die. That's every second. That means you're alive. You're eating. You have nutrition. You're producing new cells all the time. That's why the dust in your house is nothing but you, because you have removed all your dead cells and you produce new ones. It's the same thing for bones and muscles and brain. You keep on producing it. So this is because of mechanotransduction of a live being. So when you're in space, now you're thinking about space, you remove the mechanotransduction. Now you don't have the effects of the forces. What happens to the body? Every single system. Well, since it does not have the mechanotransduction, it will begin to what I call hypertrophy. It will start beginning to adapt to that environment where there's no gravity, or technically it's called microgravity rather than zero gravity. Zero gravity is a Hollywood invention because there's supposed to be zero. You're floating. No, that's not true. As long as you're close to a gravitational body, a body with mass, even if it's just a small moon, you are influenced by that gravity. So it's called microgravity. So now, to answer the first question here, Brandon, is one word: mechanotransduction. If you remove that, the human body will not survive. It will start degrading. So so it's basically, space is like an analog to being comatose or bed rest or bedridden. So it's like an analog. It's an analog for aging. So that's a long cut to answering your first question, Brandon. I hope that kind of makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And I think that really drives the point home that the importance of mechanotransduction for just what all of our body processes is so critical. And of course, obviously you were kind of doing some research on some of these things too, specifically kind of more with low back pain. So I realized that you published quite a few studies, with the first research study published in 2008 named Pathophysiology of Low Back Pain During Exposure to Microgravity, which I actually still have the original copy that you gave me back when I was in the clinic. I still have that.
Oh, thank you.
Well, no, you gave it. So I was like, I got to keep on to this because this is interesting.
Yeah, I signed that for you, I think.
You did. Yeah, you did. And, especially because some people may not be aware of kind of this study and this research that you've done. So do you think you could kind of give the listeners an overview of what your team has learned from researching this topic over the years and to where the team is working currently now?
Sure. Okay. Let's start with that. Why it became low back pain in space. Well, there's one thing about human passion. If you are passionate enough to what you want in life, things just fall into it. It's called resonance, and we can always liken it, because we really can't explain why things happen as it is. There's a whole matrix of possibilities that's surrounding everyone. And it's real, but we can't really see it. It's almost the same as a space-time continuum. It's there, and we're kind of swimming in it. The older scientists and philosophers of the early 18th and 19th centuries call it the ether. So we're swimming in the ether. It means that this time and space can be bent. Like Einstein in physics have proven that in experiments that it can be bent. Like a faster object closer to the speed of light will increase its mass, and time diminishes. So it means that the faster you go, the slower time goes, and that's the basis of the science fiction of time travel. So if you look at that possibility, so I'm talking about this not to divulge away from the topic, it's because I'm talking about why things happen as it is. There are matrix of possibilities that if you're passionate enough, it will come to you as much as a mass in space. The bigger the planet, the more it deforms and displaces the space-time continuum. It results in gravity. And everybody knows Jupiter has heavier gravity than, let's say, Mercury, because Jupiter displaces with more mass. So passion is equivalent to that mass. The greater the passion, the more you will attract the right opportunity somehow. You can't explain it, but it's something real. And people believe in it. That's why people believe in a karma. And what is karma? You can't explain what it is, but it's, again, the matrix of possibilities. You resonate in the negative, and you attract the negative. Resonate in the positive, you attract the positive. So I maintained that passion. So that's why it happened with the back pain. I maintained the passion that somehow I wanted to get involved with the space program. And how did I want to? I wanted to go to space. That was my first passion. So my thinking now is, how can I get involved? How can I go to space? So in my dealings with Ola Grimsby, we have what you call competency forums. Ola Grimsby invited Dr. Hargens, who is a top scientist for NASA through UCSD. And he's actually a recipient of NASA's highest civilian award, just 2017, just FYI. He discussed in a lecture about exercise in space and what the astronauts are doing from the 70s and up. And he mentioned something that kind of piqued my interest. He said, NASA does not know why astronauts develop low back pain in space and why they have a higher incidence of herniated nucleus pulposus. So the key there was NASA doesn't know why. Okay, so now it's my interest. Like, how am I going to transmit and share the information I received from my orthopedic manual physical therapy? And I just have to emphasize that it's not just the algorithms of how to manipulate, how to mobilize, how to evaluate. It's critical thinking. I developed that critical thinking along the way, and I know that you've experienced that critical thinking in my evaluations when you were a student of mine, Brandon. So that form of critical thinking is applicable to your daily life. So I was thinking, how can I apply all the knowledge I've learned through histology, physiology, biomechanics, how that applies to back pain in space? So I was thinking mechanotransduction. So now, how do I translate that to NASA? Well, I presented that question to Dr. Hargens. Well, he said, you have to publish in a peer-reviewed study. So now I understand how NASA works. It's not because of they're not going to move just because you suggested something that looks or sounds good. You have to prove it in a published research somehow. It has to be peer-reviewed. So now that was the challenge. I started writing a paper on, because there nothing existed about back pain in space and hernia disc, nothing. It was just mentions of astronauts, of high-level NASA scientists, but no real article. And there was an article about a report in 2010 about the incidence of back pain and hernia discs from the space program during the shuttle era. And it was very high. 68% of the astronauts developed back pain, and a majority developed, a small percentage, developed hernia disc. I interviewed one astronaut at one time during astronaut Robert Springer, because he had developed back pain during his space shuttle flights. I met him when I did a microgravity parabolic flight in 2006. So I started interviewing him, and he said that he had back pain. He told NASA, but NASA couldn't give him an answer. So that gave me more motivation to, hey, I'm going to solve this, because I'm not going to solve this for myself. I'm going to solve this for the physical therapy profession, because we're really not involved. So one good thing about that is that, I started searching for the answers with the guidance of this important figure in my life, from Dr. Oleg Grimsey to now Dr. Alan Hargens. He is a current professor in orthopedics at the UCSD. In fact, two of his students had become astronauts, FYI, and that's how good this man is. So he guided me, and I worked my buttocks off, and it took me 8 years to write that review articles. And you start thinking, how can someone write something for 8 years? Because I kept on writing, I kept on sending it to him. He kept on sending it to these world-renowned scientists, and it always came back with lots of crosses and red inks and saying, I don't agree with this, find another resource. And I kept on destroying and rebuilding it until in 2008, it became an important research that was published in Aviation, Space, and Environmental Medicine, and this is the official journal of the Aerospace Medical Association. From then on, in 2008, since now we have some kind of reference, somehow this paper had hit the road, and so many scientists are now referencing that. It was the only thing of it, the only one of its kind. Fortunately, in 2008, NASA released a call. This, I believe, in a certain period of time, NASA released a call for research. And this is called the NASA's Critical Path Roadmap Risks and Questions. And that's the title of this call. One of the calls there is about herniated disc. It's actually called, at least it was classified under Integrated Research Plan Gap B4. That's a specific name for it. Gap in NASA means that there is a gap of knowledge they don't know. So they're going to send forth a call for research. So Dr. Hargens called me and asked me to join his team to apply for this grant. And fortunately, it was granted with no doubt at all, because we were the only ones with an amazing team of people that Dr. Hargens had gotten together. So from then on, there was a time as well, that Brandon, that I received my first response from my application to the astronaut corps, and it was a thank you for applying, we'll call you later kind of thing. So I was a little bit depressed during that time, but because I really wanted to ride a $1 billion rocket. So the passion kept on going. And somehow I got invited to talk in the Humans in Space Symposium, and then we got involved with this grant. We were given a grant to study 12 astronauts before and after flight. NASA wanted to know what's going on, because NASA wanted to make sure that the countermeasures are perfect for the problem. So in a general term, that's how it started. And then we can go from there, from what you wanted to know about the research. So as a general rule, again, I cannot tell you the very precise conclusion. I will give you the direction toward that, because we just finished our study. So from 2010 to 2018 this year, we finished the 12 astronauts before and after flight. So I was present in all the data collection before and after. And I was the first person to get all the testing. What we did was we had a battery of tests for these astronauts that were approved by NASA. We had MRIs, supine MRIs for their morphology of the discs and anatomy. We had a separate MRI for upright and loaded, unloaded and loaded. And we have spinal kinematics, which means it's basically a fluoroscopy, a moving fluoroscopy. And then we have this program where it's taking algorithms and mathematical measurements of the individual spinal segmental movements, comparing this before and after flight, whether upright or non-weight bearing. We have pain questionnaires using oswestry, and we have the only thing we did for back strength, we call it the back strength test, is the Byring-Sorensen test, or BS test. So it's basically like a planking maneuver for the astronaut before flight and after flight to do a comparison. And what we found so far, at least going toward the actual definitive published reports, was that there is definitely definitive that there's a good percentage of astronauts developing back pain in space. and we've added neck pain as well to the current study. Number two, the previous reports that the astronauts' spines lengthen in space, we found that to be true. In On Earth, we have what you call the diurnal variations of a fluid intake or inflow or outflow of the discs. Correct? Most of you are familiar with that. Where the disc imbibes, or with diffusion and convection, it increases its fluid, its thickness because of negative pressure during non-weight bearing supine when you're sleeping, and then during the daytime when you're moving around and compressing the disc, so the disc kind of thins out and you increase your lumbar lordosis. So eventually, you're shortest at the end of the day and tallest in the morning. So that's called the diurnal variation or flux. It's normally about 1% of your total body length on 1G, but in space it's about 8%. Up to 8%. The changes are variable. On 1G, the spinal lengthening from diurnal to nocturnal and vice versa is about 1.5 to 3 centimeters on an average. In space, the values are 2 to 3 times as much, meaning it's about 3 to 6 centimeters. One of our co-investigators, a member of our team, Scott Parazinski, and by the way, Scott Parazinski was awarded in 2017 as a Hall of Famer for the astronaut corps. He was the first astronaut to summit Mount Everest back in the early 2000s. He reported as part of our team that he grew about 8% of body weight. I think he had about a 6.5 centimeter difference, and he even had difficulty in getting into a spacesuit, or what we call the EMU, or extra mobility unit. So we confirmed that there is a change, but now we're thinking, where's the change coming from? Because we can't just speculate. Now we need to have proof. NASA gave us a grant to find definitive measures. So we did find that the discs do change, but we could not find so far a good statistical value that it is the main factor, whereas we speculated before it was the main factor. We did find that there is a difference in the lumbar lordosis. It flattens out in space, so it's pretty typical without the hydrostatic pressure, and that's and because of no weight bearing, and plus the lack of gravitational load. So we did find that there's a lengthening, and now it looks like partially discs, and there's also a reduction in the lumbar lordosis. And then definitively, there is weakness, and we found through MRI functional cross-sectional areas that the lumbar muscles do shrink. But we have to now go back to the first premise on Earthbound, that we have generally two major skeletal muscles that support the spine or any other joint. We have the red muscles and the white muscles, or the stabilizers, which are the smaller muscles. They're oxidative. They have a completely different biochemistry. And there's the white muscle, more anaerobic. So we did find it does correspond that the muscles that shrink the most or atrophy the most seems to be more just like on Earth when you have an injury. It seems to be the multifidus or the red muscles, the stabilizers. So we're finding that the recovery is still there, but it's not as efficient and not as good. So we found that. We did find that there are changes in the morphology, because we have found that a small percentage of our astronauts did develop herniations, and we did find some other changes, such as end plate changes. So there's some the variability in the surface. So we even found a small herniation, and so there are changes. So now our goal now is crunching these numbers to presenting NASA with definitive empirical evidence of what's happening, and this will be the basis of the appropriate countermeasures that we're going to do. And the countermeasures are just going to boil down to returning the mechanotransduction similar to 1G. So far, that's the general idea, and we are in the process of working on getting some published papers, which should be coming up in 2019. I will be part of those papers as well, and thanks to our team. Of course, I'd like to thank our team. We have an amazing team. One of them is an astronaut. One of our members is the co-inventor of the MRI, believe it or not. This is Dr. Larry Minkoff. He co-invented the MRI together with Dr. Damadian way back then, and he hails himself as the first human being to receive an MRI. So we have such a great team from UCSD and Dr. Lodes from University of California, San Francisco, and a host of other brilliant people. And I am the only physical therapist and manual therapist in the group. So that's just an overall presentation. A little long for a short answer, but that's considered a short answer.
Well, it sounds like, Jojo, the research that you guys did, I mean, there's a lot of great data in that study. And I mean, it sounds like you had a great team to work with. But my question is, obviously, there's a lot of variables to control in a study like this, especially when you are talking about space. So what are some of the limitations and barriers that your team encountered when you were conducting this research?
I think the first, maybe we classify this as a barrier, is that this has never been done before, so there are no references. So the old adage of saying, when you find something, you're rewriting the books. But this time, there are no books. We are writing the books. So the first barrier, I guess, would be there is really nothing to compare it with aside from some animal models, which are roughly an estimation of a few things that are happening in approximation to the human body. Some of the cells are similar, but some of them would be the time limitation of the astronauts, because they're very precise. We can't just call them on a short notice. The astronauts' time is scheduled by NASA. Whether there's bad weather or whether it's a holiday or Christmas, if it's scheduled that way, we have to be there. We are allotted a certain time, so that was a hardship that we got used to it. That's one. One other barrier probably would be how good the information we get really is, if it's really 100% related to space flight. I'm saying this because we have quite a bit of astronauts coming from the U.S. Air Force and the Navy who are fighter pilots, and they've logged thousands of hours. So they've been exposed to so much high G. So pre-flight, we've seen degenerative changes already. So now we're starting to kind of put our brains together that the changes that we come up with, are they related to pre-injury levels or pre-degenerative levels, pre-space, pre-flight to space or not. But otherwise, the astronauts are very cooperative. They're funny and stoic at the same time, and that's the only thing. There's really nothing to compare. We're writing the books on that, so we give the best answers we can when we're approached with the questions. Of course, our comparison is our earthbound changes, and that's why I proposed some of the theories I have initially based on the physiology and kinematics and biomechanics that we learned in orthopedic manual therapy. So it's just an application to it, and I try to integrate that with these different disciplines.
I think that's really interesting, Jojo. And I know that earlier you had kind of mentioned adding neck pain to the mix into the research in that as well. But, is there any other research regarding any other musculoskeletal conditions during spaceflight other than what you guys are doing?
Well, there are some research as well, but none from a physical therapy, orthopedic manual physical therapy point of view. Most of the research that's based on musculoskeletal is bone. Okay, that's bone and sensory motor. But with regard to the exercises, there is none. So we're the first team that is proposing this, and the proposals for countermeasures are actually based on a principle that's called scientific therapeutic exercise progressions that are Norwegian-based initially and known initially as medical exercise therapy. And that's the best that I can find, at least logically, that addresses the aerobic capacity of the muscles that are atrophied. So it's a matter of isolating those muscles first, and then going into the bigger muscles or the anaerobic muscles, then going into the functional movements where you combine all the movements of the muscles to multiplanar movements. So in the end, the countermeasures we're proposing are going to be based on our science on orthopedic manual therapy. It's just a matter of merging it with the current science they have. So there's not a whole lot. It's an open field right now to research with the astronauts. But the only problem is it's not an easy path to grab an astronaut. It requires so much stages, so many stages, and I have to take an ethics examination from Miller University. If he's online in Florida, before you actually touch an astronaut, you have to be part of a grant, number one, and you need to have a certification called CT, or collaborative institutional what is it called? That's collaborative institutional exam, and it takes about a whole day to study and pass the examination, and it's renewable. So there are several requirements, and even before I do the examination on exercising and testing the isometric endurance, I had to be interviewed by NASA, by their flight surgeons and the safety committee, and really it's almost like an oral examination, because they approve whether I'm going to be able to touch the astronauts or not. So it's filled with so many stages, but it's complex, but not complicated. I have to differentiate those two words. When you say something is complicated, it means that there's so many parts you can't understand it. When you say it's complex, there's so many parts, but you can arrange it. You can win over it. There's a way to fix it. So it's complex, not complicated. So that's the general idea. It's open field right now, and it's something that people who aspire to be involved with the space program look into.
Yeah, so I really appreciate some of those points that you mentioned, Jojo. And, obviously you're the first group to look at these things. There's lots of things that happen to astronauts when they're in space. There's no gravity. They're not using their muscles. What do we need to do for the research on when it comes to musculoskeletal pain in space flight, besides the research that you guys are currently doing?
Yeah, I think it's important that we bring the flag of physical therapy or orthopedic manual therapy or our other disciplines to NASA. Right now, NASA has their astronaut strength and reconditioning program. They have a separate building, they have a separate team, but the team is basically all athletic trainers. I did not need or see any physical therapists there. So it's we're as a profession, we're not really directly involved. Physical therapy is involved sometimes when an astronaut is referred for physical therapy outside of Johnson Space Center, but there is no real physical therapy hold that is formalized on the space program. So I believe that what we can do is that we have to somehow look into the research of what's going on out there. So individually, you need to find research of your interest, whether it's vestibular or whether it's ocular, or if it's because there are changes in the eye as well, in the eyeballs, whether it's other systemic factors like blood pressure, fluid shifts, or musculoskeletal. Look into that. And what I did was by what you call happenstance, or what most people call happenstance, meeting the right people of the right timing and of the right interest, I sought to solve something for the physical therapy profession. I didn't want to solve it for me, because people will forget me later on when I'm out of this world. But if I do it for the profession, it will be remembered for the profession, by the profession. So what I did was I searched for the person, which I eventually did find, who was doing research on that, or kind of hovering around those areas. I contacted that scientist and presented my ideas of how I can help out, and asked if I can be part of the team. So there is no direct path. I created it, and that's what I did. And I would like to teach people that if you have a certain interest, find the best author that you can seek out there, and their information is always available. Contact them and see how you can participate. Well, most of the time you may participate without pay, and which I did for 8 years. I presented myself and I did my work, and I didn't care about the pay or not, because I was considering more the advancement of the base knowledge and how you can be part of the space program, or humanity's exploration of the last frontier, space. So I guess most of the time people are influenced by or inspired by science fiction, believe it or not.
Well, of course. I mean, we couldn't go on the show without mentioning at least one Star Wars reference here, because we love.
Yeah.
I mean, we love Star Wars. I mean, obviously, I'm big bias, but what are some of the other pros and even some cons that you haven't mentioned already about being a consultant and researcher for NASA?
Well, I think the pros are more than the cons. I could not even recall a con, something that's negative. It's all positive, because for one thing, I was able to represent our profession, even though I was not officially appointed by the profession. I just did it as my own initiative. So there's a lot of pros personally, because there's a lot of personal growth. So suddenly you're learning new things. It's a completely different perspective, and you can only learn it if you're in that mindset with NASA. It means that everything has to be precise. Everything has to be well referenced. There is less room for speculation, more on to what's more logical and referenced again. There is a lot of invitation for talks. A lot of invitation means that you get more exposure to not just about the self, it's about exposure to other minds that you can meet, because every single contact, every single opportunity is another way that you can step out of your comfort zone to know more. So the costs are a lot more. And in the business side, yes, it is, because somehow people get to know about you. They got to know more about what I do, because I talk about NASA, and then they realize I'm also a physical therapist. So suddenly there was this human interest of, I'd like to have him as my physical therapist. So you get the invitations for academic reasons, from talks to writing papers. It's pretty high. The opportunity to empower the next generation students, physical therapists, doctors, whoever they are, it's very high. The long-lasting friendship that you can develop with scientists and astronauts, that's the most amazing thing. To the point that it almost brings me to tears. Let's give you a quick example. I was inspired in the space program in 1969, July 1969, and that was Apollo 11. I was actually alive then and watched Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walk on the moon, while Michael Collins was orbiting the moon. Well, eventually I got to meet Buzz Aldrin, but because Neil Armstrong had passed away already, I was able to meet Buzz Aldrin, and it inspired me. Plus, of course, Star Wars and Star Trek. I got all of that. We need some form of inspiration. It's not just wanting to do something, but everything stems from childhood. That's why it's important that you have to empower the young ones. And if a young one could be empowered, inspired by you as a person, then they would want to become like you. But the best reward is that when the student becomes greater than the teacher, that's the best reward. Stephanie, I can't think of any con, really.
Yeah, as a kid, Jojo, I always had this big dream of becoming an astronaut. I mean, what kid doesn't want to be an astronaut? It's such a cool thing to be able. I mean, I can't imagine what it was like to be able to see, Buzz Aldrin go to the moon, and then now you're working for NASA. So this is probably the most important question, I would think. How is one able to go into space, even as far away as the International Space Station? How am I going to become an astronaut, Jojo?
Well, there's a couple of things. But first, there has to be some changes in NASA, because NASA has categories of what are the qualifications to become an astronaut. Stephanie, I had 3 applications since 2000. 3 applications to the astronaut corps, and I never got a call for an interview, but I got a call to be part of the program somehow. Well, the first is that you have to have graduated with at least a Bachelor of Science in the physical sciences. So we have engineering, chemistry, geology, and but there's nothing in physical therapy. None. It's not included. You can be a physician, but not a nurse. So I think the categories are a little antiquated, and I brought that up to one of the division heads of NASA when I was able to talk to the person at one time, and this person said that that's how it is, and that never really been revised. So now we have something against us as physical therapists. Physical therapy is not one of the qualifications. So even if I'm qualified to do more things, I could not go. I mean, the NASA robot and the internet will kick you out immediately. Second, you need to have graduated from a state university, and that cancels me out because I graduated foreign. In the Philippines, the University of Santo Tomas, and I graduated my doctoral through the Ola Grimsby Institute. So it's not a state university. But all in all, this is what I'm going to tell you, Stephanie. NASA may own the astronaut corps, but they do not own space. Now there are private ventures. There are ways that you can look into what is needed there that you can apply for to become their astronaut. Because the definition of an astronaut is someone who can fly beyond 50 miles, 50 miles altitude. If you can achieve that, you are technically called an astronaut. So there are different ways. There's no easy way. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that there is no direct route to it. I am 55 years old. I still have dreams to go into space, but it looks like it may not be NASA. I'm going to find a way somehow. I'm going to find a way, even if it's just close to space at a high altitude. I would take it. But I have my thinking cap on how I can do it. So I'm still on a rampage to get there. So I would say keep the dream alive, keep the passion alive, because by virtue of your intensity of passion, you will gravitate the right opportunities. Keep it up, Stephanie.
Well, I definitely don't doubt that someday you'll get to space. I mean, you've already done all these amazing things. And actually, I have met an astronaut in real life. I was at a conference when I was an undergrad. It was a conference that I was presenting some breast cancer research at, and the keynote was an astronaut. And he was a physician, a surgeon, and I think he actually invented the PET scan too. So, I mean, he's like a Nobel Prize winning scientist, plus a physician, plus an astronaut. Like, wow, mind blown.
Wow. Do you remember his name?
No, I can't remember his name, but I totally remembered how impressive he was. And he talked a lot about minorities in science. So it was a good talk.
Yeah, that's what these astronauts are so inspirational, because the astronauts are living proof that our brain, we have the exact same shape capacity as any other human on the planet, but you can utilize the brain. And you can potentiate it to the maximum. And it's just that most people don't believe enough of themselves and what they can do. That's the problem. We don't believe enough. And I'm also a motivational speaker, Stephanie. So I teach people by the neuroscience, and I put a little philosophy, a little bit of scripture in it. And to get people to maximize. You can maximize dendritic formation just by pure passion. You can do it, and the growth of dendrites are actually observable in real time, really observable. And we all believe that we only use about 10% or less of our brain in our lifetime. And isn't that pathetic? You can't use more. But the only thing that stops us is our belief system. We believe that's it.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally true. I think that the biggest limitation we have in ourselves and our fear of failure. I think that a lot of people don't try to go for, the things that they really want because it's hard and the chances of failure can be very high. You talked a lot about some of the changes you'd like to see with NASA as far as accepting people to become astronauts. We're a healthcare education podcast. I'm really interested in potentially what you see are some of the top problems with the current physical therapy education model and potentially some solutions to these.
Yep. By the way, since you guys are into Star Wars, let me ask a question instead. If you would be a character in Star Wars, who would you be? Yeah, Brandon, start with you.
All right, that's a good question.
I know who I would be.
I'd say Luke Skywalker.
I'd be C3PO.
You're C3PO, Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay, I know who I want to be.
Who do you want to be?
I want to be Yoda.
You do a great impression.
That's really good.
Yeah, maybe we can do a whole podcast using a Yoda impersonation.
Oh, that'd be epic.
Yeah. But I think overall, I would really like to encourage the listeners out there. You don't have to be a physical therapist to know about what I want. I just want the full potential of the human brain of humanity. Humanity has so much capacity for goodness, and most of the time, majority of the people are wasting it in irrelevant matters like battling politics and these ideations. Like, it's not really helping humanity. It's devolving humanity in uh, in fighting, infighting. Same thing with in any kind of profession. There's always some kind of infighting. There's always the politics of things. If we can just remove that and have a common vision that we are all working together for to be accountable to our patients, that we are in here as a vocation, not to establish our own little schools and our flags, and we're fighting each other, fighting who's better than who. If we put ourselves in that mindset, we can do so many great things. So I can see like you guys are like the rebellion. We are the rebels. We are the Star Wars rebels. We're trying to make a difference, but a difference in a point that it's unifying people, not dividing people together. And I think it starts with not from an external source, but from the internal, individual. If the new generation professionals are made emphasize that it's about accountability to their profession, it's about the vocation, it's about searching the truth. It means that if something is presented to you, even to the fact that somebody tells you you're wrong, you need to find the researches or reasons why you could be wrong. Because if you are wrong and you realize it, then you can become better. And that was one of the key factors in my travels to NASA. I sought the things that were wrong in me instead of enjoying the things that were right. Because anything that's right in science could be wrong the next day. The things may change depending on the data, because it is science, it's reproducible data. So it begins with the mindset. And if we can only do that, and believing in a higher power than anything, you could call it the force, I call it Jesus Christ. So it's up to you. But I mean, anything that can be done great has to come from an inspiration that's also great. So that's my general final closing remarks on this great conversation.
I love it. And I love when you said the Rebel Alliance, because I think it's ironic that we all each chose characters of the Alliance. I think that's pretty interesting. I think that's a very important point, Jojo. And I think that's a very strong message for a lot of the listeners to really hear, because we normally ask a final question on the show, but you pretty much answered it in that one. But, if Jojo, if people perhaps want to learn more about this avenue and what you've done, or they kind of want to see what you're up to, or kind of want to reach out if they ever have a question on anything, where can people find that information online, perhaps?
I think for now, the easiest way or the most popular way is Facebook. I am there as Jojo, one word, Jojo, and the last name is Sayson, Sayson. I have a personal page which is full, and Facebook stops friends at 5,000, so that's filled. But I have another Jojo Sayson, which is a public figure. So all you need to do is click the like button, and what I do is I do parallel postings. I turned into a motivational site, so you can see philosophical, spiritual, and scientific things that I put in there, and you can message me from there. I think that would be the easiest one, or at jojosayson.com. Everything is connected there. All my other sites are connected. But Brandon, let me tell you a little bit of our connection with Star Wars, a real connection with our team. One of our co-investigators is astronaut Scott Parazinski, a very good friend of mine. In one of his shuttle flights, he brought with him the lightsaber of Luke Skywalker. He brought it to space. It was lent to him by George Lucas to bring to space.
Oh, wow.
Then when he returned back, he had to personally return it to George Lucas, and with his son. So his son was the one who presented it to George Lucas, and Scott's son's name is Luke. Yeah, that's our connection to Star Wars. I hope that some of you guys there listening would learn somehow, even just a tiny bit. And I'd like to quote the poet Rumi, R-U-M-I, on this. He said, "I am just a drop of knowing. Let me dissolve in you." Yeah, I'm just a drop of knowing. So I hope that somehow this drop, which is my presence tonight, would dissolve in you, and somehow you would find the passion and the strength to get some wisdom and some knowledge out of it, and create a top-rate version of yourself with 90% utilization of your brain cells. It's doable. The astronauts and a lot of the scientists I work with, they've done it. Why can't we? We can do it.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. I think that's a very strong message for everyone, frankly, to hear. And Jojo, it's been quite an amazing chat today to talk about so many avenues regarding your journey, space flight, research, how to get up to space, and even some Star Wars and education. So that's always a great chat. But thank you so much for your time, your service, and efforts for coming on. And it's always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure. I'm very proud of you, Brandon. And likewise, Stephanie, thank you so much for having me. And what you're doing is just an amazing thing because it's opening up new doors. And you have already done that.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast, as we greatly appreciate your support to help us advance healthcare education. We are very happy to announce that we have created a new tool to help develop clinicians into better experts. With that being said, we have created the HET Light tool, which LIGHT stands for Learning Integrated Towards Expertise. And what we've done is we've taken our first year's worth of episodes with experts in the fields of healthcare and education, and we've taken one golden nugget or theory on expertise and presented it to you in a very easily consumable format so that people can take one lesson or nugget per week and map out and plan how to incorporate it into your clinical and educational practices. And by the end of the year, we think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how far you've progressed towards becoming an expert. To find out more, please check it out at pteducator.com/HET, which is also available in our show notes. Thank you again all for your continued support. Thank you for attending class today, and we hope that you learned something and gained value from the content.
If you'd like to schedule office hours with us, feel free to add us on Twitter at HET Podcast, on Instagram, HET Podcast, on Facebook, the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast, and the homepage, healthcareeducationtransformationpodcast.com.
And for those of you following along in the syllabus, extra credit can be obtained by liking us, sharing us, and leaving a review.
Let's continue our journey up Mount Educational Success as lifelong learners.